The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Welcome, everybody. We're just going to give participants a couple more minutes to log in, and then we'll get started. So we're going to get started. First of all, a very warm welcome to you all. My name is Eleni Polakrignadu, and I'll be your moderator today. Before we get started, a couple of housekeeping notes. The webinar will be recorded and shared with you in a follow-up email in the coming days. You can also ask questions throughout the duration using the navigation on the right-hand side. There's a little question box there. We plan on leaving at least 15 minutes at the end for questions, so get your thinking hats on. So we have some great speakers today who will delve into the power of data. Starting on the left, we have Callum Rees from SustainIt. SustainIt is a global sustainability consultancy that drives positive change in the world by making data meaningful. SustainIt is a software agnostic company, but works with multiple vendors to help clients implement sustainability software solutions. We also have Preshi Patel joining us from Thinkstep. Thinkstep is a sustainability software, data, and consulting company that enables businesses to succeed sustainably. Thinkstep and SustainIt partner together to help companies drive change and maximize the value of data they collect. Toyota Material Handling, the global leader in material handling equipment, is one of those companies. And we're very lucky today to have Tom Schalenbourg join us to discuss his work at the company. Today, we're going to start the webinar with a moderated discussion between Callum and Preshi on the trends they've seen through their client work, before shifting gears and hearing from Tom's perspective on how he has managed to harness sustainability data at Toyota Material Handling and make better decisions. Now, the power of data is by no means a new topic of discussion in the sustainability industry. Over the last decade, we've seen a rise in sustainability data collection and measurement across all industry types. And yet, decisions are still being made on a daily basis on instinct and common perception. During this webinar, we're going to dig into the why and look into some tangible examples of how companies have used existing data to make critical business decisions and look at the outcomes of those decisions. To aid this discussion, we find it useful to think of the Journey Warden data value stack, as you can see on your screen. Now, this pyramid follows a similar principle to Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So all companies start at the bottom of the pyramid during the data journey and can only progress to the next level once they have mastered the level they're on. So you'll see at the bottom, we start with data collection and display of data. And as you move up, you turn into more predictive and action-driven data. Now, without further ado, I'm going to pass it on to Preshi and Callum to start our conversation. So Preshi, Callum, you've both worked with a variety of different companies on sustainability reporting, sustainability data management. Companies around the world are collecting data, some of it's granular, some of it's aggregated, from your experience, what are the common challenges that sustainability managers are facing around harnessing the power of data?
Yeah, thank you, Eleni. So in general, the challenges that I've seen clients face is generally threefold. So firstly, it's actually understanding where they currently are, so the current state of play of their data. And then secondly, understanding where they're heading. So that's more generally the forward-looking piece of the current trajectory of their business, to make those informed business decisions that they can make from their data. And finally, communication. So communication of the data that they have. The power of data is only useful if it's being communicated out to those stakeholders that can make those business decisions.
Yeah, and just to add to that, obviously every organization is different, in the way that they're structured, in the culture, in the way that they communicate, and kind of course, what sectors they're in. And whilst I don't think that the Journey Warden data value stack is kind of definitive in explaining this, oftentimes challenges are common, from my point of view, where at least one level or multiple levels either being completely overlooked by a company, or not enough attention is being focused on them. Coupled with that, and I think that many people on the webinar today will agree with this, even today when sustainability and health and safety are such huge topics, the size of the teams and the budgets allocated to those teams don't really stack up and don't compare to other departments. So that's obviously a kind of a big challenge as well.
That makes a lot of sense, but it sounds like it's not the collecting the data that's the biggest challenge. It's more what are people doing with that data, where some of those challenges that you mentioned around the size of the teams come in. So why is it so difficult for companies who have been collecting sustainability data for so long to mine valuable insight out of it?
Yeah, you're right. I mean, there has been difficulty in mining valuable insight out of the data. And one of the things that I've seen companies and where they've had issues of doing this is historically they've just added data metrics to their data collection processes. And what that actually does is it increases the volume of data that's collected. And over time, you collect this data, which actually might not be relevant or material to the company anymore. And that increased burden of collecting that data can overwhelm those that need to actually analyze and drive value, because you're spending more time in collecting it versus actually analyzing the data. So I actually had a client in the professional services sector who hadn't reviewed the data that they were collecting in about 4 years. And actually when they did that exercise, what they realized was that several of the data points that they were collecting, most of them being some of the more challenging ones that were taking more time, wasn't actually material to their business anymore and wasn't needed to be reported. So just by doing that review and aligning the data collection and the data collected with what they actually need, it freed up the time to be able to do that analysis, which is so often not done because there's just not enough time to do it. So, I mean, in my opinion, companies should conduct a materiality assessment on average between 3 to 4 years, depending on the sector that they're in, to ensure that the business actually understands what's material to them and to the stakeholders, who are the ones that are actually ultimately influenced by the decision that's the data that's collected.
Absolutely. And just kind of to add to that review process, something that we help clients with quite a lot, and we've kind of seen and heard from quite a lot, is also the planning. So going into a bit more detail of the process that you can take that could be considered best practice. And this is regardless of if you're going on a new journey or as Preshi said, you're kind of looking to adapt where you are and kind of evolve your current state of play. So I think the first thing that's really important is to speak to all of your internal and external stakeholders related to sustainability data. These are the guys that are involved, and you're going to get some really insightful feedback from them, and really kind of try and get a grasp on the types of data that you're going to need across the business. So for example, external, you've obviously got your external reporting frameworks, so you need data for that, CDP, GRI, DGSI, etc. Then you've got your investors. What data do they want to see? What do my investors care about? What do the management team care about? And then, of course, you've got your kind of basic mandatory requirements, so SECR in the UK. Just an example from this, one thing that is really important, and doesn't have to be too complex, I don't think, it's going through a mapping process. So you kind of understand the whole landscape of data, and then you make it more efficient by saying, okay, where are there crossovers? What are the KPIs? What are the metrics that I need? And then you can start kind of planning things such as the roles and responsibilities. So where's the data coming from? Who's going to need to interact with the data? Who's going to be checking the data? And then, of course, looking at the frequency of that data, which I think we'll touch on a bit later. And again, just to agree, this is an ongoing process, so this can happen multiple times.
Yeah, I just want to touch on the frequency thing Callum mentioned. This is an area where companies can actually improve their ability to mine data out of insights out of their data. So firstly, by actually understanding what you want to use your data for, it's step number one in determining the frequency that you should collect this data in. For example, obtaining an annual electricity value won't give you the insight into your usage over the year, which might be key in making decisions as to how you want to do your reduction for electricity. But collecting it on a more frequent basis, like monthly, will help you gain that insight. Comparing that to something like collecting refrigerant data on a monthly basis, that doesn't give you the same insight as doing electricity, for example. So it's useful to know what frequency you should collect data in to know where you're investing your time.
Absolutely. And just very quickly to put on a health and safety hat, because of course today we're talking about non-financial data in its broadest sense, not just environmental data. So this can be a really crucial decision. So with health and safety, you're going to want to be a lot more predictive rather than reactive, because you can be talking about, injuries or perhaps even lives at stake by analyzing things after the fact.
Absolutely. And so, companies go through this process, they understand, what data they need to collect, why it matters, what matters, and what its purpose is, and using a more predictive element to it. But what about quality? So I think a lot of companies that we talk to are really concerned about making sure that the data that is being collected at whatever frequency is coming with quality accuracy. And so there's that level of commitment from data providers. So how can companies ensure that quality? Is that somewhere where software comes in?
Absolutely, software helps. Perhaps we're biased, but I think it's kind of a fact at this point that software does help in numerous ways, and data quality is definitely one of them. So, for example, by having simple things such as different permission levels, whereby you have those responsible for submitting the data, and then those responsible for reviewing the data before it's released, or whatever the terminology is in the software, is one. Having kind of built-in checks and data validation rules is obviously something that can be streamlined with software. However, and again, I'm going to sound a bit boring and keep talking about process, but you kind of need to have the human element. You need to have a process alongside this. So you need to understand what the software can do, but then you also, again, it's a continuous process. You need to manage this. So by having those kind of roles and responsibilities in place, so that everyone knows what data they need to submit, in what format, and by when, is critical to the using of the tools themselves.
So there's the element of software in terms of people putting in information into the software, and then there's automation where sort of we're taking out the human and trying to automate as much as possible. So I guess where does automation come in harnessing the power of data?
So automation can play a vital role in the data collection process. So if the data is actually being collected in another system, it makes sense to utilize that data rather than spending the time and the effort to go and collect it again. You also then get that one source of truth on that data, and that means that that data is consistent across the business and in all the various external reporting you might need to do, like within your financial reports, and that information being used to normalize your sustainability data in your sustainability report. So wherever you can get automation, it can be a win-win situation, because you're saving time in collecting that data, but you're also ensuring that it is that one source of truth and making sure that there's accuracy around it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, again, from the software perspective, most, if not all, software nowadays come with kind of open API feeds, and you can automate data not just from other systems themselves, but from things like meters and machinery, sensors and things of that nature. But they're not used as much as you'd think. And again, it's just from our perspective, working with clients across different sectors and different softwares. But the functionality is there, but it really kind of, I guess, from my point of view, comes back to the planning. If you don't really understand the workflows of the data, then you're never going to set up the linkages. And if you don't understand that as well, then you're going to kind of double report. That's something that we see all the time, double reporting.
So it sounds like it's there, that the capabilities are there, but again, it comes back to understanding how you want to use your data, what the processes are, and finding the most effective ways to really facilitate that data collection to be able to harness the power. Now, Callum, you mentioned earlier a little bit about that idea of shifting from reactive to proactive, and I kind of want to hone in on that because I think that's a key area of interest for our audience today. How can sustainability managers really shift from this mindset of reactively reviewing data to proactively using data to inform strategy?
Very good question. And what I'm going to do is slopey shoulder the technical side of that to Preshi, who's worked in systems a lot more. But yeah, you're absolutely right. I think that one thing for me that perhaps doesn't happen enough is kind of cross collaboration from people across different departments, and really kind of embedding the analysis into business as usual. So kind of an example of this is where you have kind of localized analysis, and whereby, for example, you have, depending on what sector you're in, let's say you're collecting data from factories, so you have somebody responsible for data collection and reporting across Northern Europe. And this really gives huge benefits because they really kind of understand what the data is telling them, and therefore they can draw more meaningful kind of conclusions from that. But it's all about embedding it so that it's an ongoing process. It's something that you're doing, not just kind of saying, okay, we're going to submit CDP, okay, we're going to submit GRI. You're analyzing the data and using it to make decisions on a regular cadence.
Yeah, just following on from that, I think this is a common concern to a lot of the sustainability managers and those using the data, is how to shift that from just collecting to actually using. And I think the majority of the people on this call could agree that majority of the time is used in managing the data collection and processing the data into those intended reports. And there's not actually enough time to actively use the data in making those decisions. So what a number of companies are now doing is investing more time in that forward projection of their data using these data collection tools that Callum mentioned. So for example, for electricity, I've seen a number of clients use their tools to identify what their usage is going to be in 10 years on their current growth projection. And by looking at this forecast, what they're actually able to do is track different actions against that projection to see what that impact's going to have to get it down to their target. And these kind of functionalities are available across a majority of these data collection tools. So one of the things I would say would be worthwhile is, if you are using one of these tools, is to see what capabilities that are available on there by speaking to your providers, and starting that step of investigating on how they could be utilized and how they could be of benefit to you, because there is a lot of capability and a lot of power in what these software tools can do to help you make that shift from just collecting it to actually using it in a better way, essentially.
Gracie, do you have a specific example, I guess, of being able to use that data to make an informed decision or to build a business case?
Yeah, absolutely. So at a previous company that I actually worked for, I used one of these software tools to make a business case for moving to a green building. So I already was collecting the energy data and the cost data of these various offices, and by using that information for offices which had recently moved to green buildings, I was able to estimate what the projected savings would have been would have been for the offices that were due to have their leases renewed. So by using the data that was already available, I was able to estimate that and present a business case to those decision makers as to, look, if we move to a green building for these offices, you're making an X amount of reduction in energy, as well as making X amount of cost savings. So by using that data, it presented that case to help them make that decision and drive change in the business.
I think that's a really powerful example and a really good tie-in, I guess, into the next bit of this conversation around. So it's not only being able to forward look and predict using the data, but it's also about communicating that data and getting that out to the right decision makers, because so often sustainability teams are siloed and the data is sitting in a small department and is not being shared out across the entire company. So what are the best ways that you've seen, both of you, in your work to share sustainability insights with stakeholders?
Yeah, so I completely agree. Oftentimes kind of data's coming in, it's very much a black hole, a vacuum where it's not being reported out. And again, as you can see on the slides there, it can be really powerful, to kind of recoin the phrase, data is beautiful. It really can be used incredibly powerfully to accelerate behavior change, for example, but also make kind of operational wins possible. So again, engagement is such a broad topic. I'll let Preshi talk about the kind of user side of things, but you've got your external stakeholders. You've also got your kind of internal stakeholders as well in here. So it's so broad, everything from your customers to your investors to the people that are actually submitting the data. They all really need to be thought about individually, and kind of having a comms plan in place, looking at, okay, so what communications medium are we going to use to reach these stakeholders? How frequently and how simply can we do so? So also from an operational point of view, it can be extremely important to focus in on, and I'll come up with a few examples in a second.
Yeah, so I think Callum touched on a lot there as well. So some of the reasons why this is happening is that companies can find it very time consuming to pull the data out of the systems at the various levels that they might need it, to put it into a PowerPoint to actually send out. And again, in some of these data collection tools, there's functionality available to automatically produce and send out those pre-configured reports in Word, PDF, PowerPoint, etc., to highlight all of those insights and data to the stakeholders. It's a huge time saver, but it also keeps those stakeholders engaged in the data, which is what you want when they're the key decision makers, essentially. And they might not have access to this data or to that tool. So it's an area I would urge companies to investigate, because I've actually seen huge engagement benefits from having the data be communicated in this way. So a beverage company that was a client of mine had actually used this this idea of creating the PowerPoints that would go out every quarter to those who were collecting the data, and what they found was that there was greater engagement from these people improved the accuracy of data that they were collecting, but it also got them to understand, we're not just entering data into a black hole and nothing's happening from it. So I do think that is an area that potentially you could look at to kind of communicate out. And as Callum touched on, a communication plan I think is key alongside your data collection processes and within your sustainability strategy, because there needs to be a relationship between the data you're collecting and the way that you are communicating it out to the people that need to know about it. So to have that plan in place would be highly beneficial.
And just a couple of, I guess, examples looking at these systems or kind of using these systems, but it doesn't have to be. The first one definitely is, but we've got one of our clients, I think a few actually, that are, they have staff intranets. So it's not just the people within the company inputting the data, and they're in these kind of small groups that of kind of departments that care, but it's the whole company. So what they're doing is they're pushing these graphs out live onto the intranet to say, look how well we're doing on cutting emissions, for example, or being really transparent actually, and kind of pushing the bad news up there as well. The permissions are completely open, so that's one way to kind of drive engagement. And as Preshi said, the benefits can be massive. A bit of an innovative one, going a step further than that. I won't name the company because I don't think it's happened yet, but looking at projecting statistics onto, how you are seeing more and more now out in the public, bus stops with moving advertisements. So the same thing on a coffee machine, funnily enough, in the staff canteen. So you've got this big kind of infographic style data set being pushed out on a coffee machine. So I think be creative with it is what I'm trying to say here, because companies are certainly looking at how to engage their customers, their staff in a much more creative way these days. And another benefit as well of kind of being seen as doing good in this way is staff retention, but also attracting great staff. A lot of companies are doing a huge amount, but they're not talking about it. So it's kind of effectively, lost in translation, which it should definitely not be, because this is the fun part of using the data, from my point of view anyway.
I mean, as a regular user of the coffee machine, I definitely would not object to having statistics being projected on it on a regular basis. Switching gears a little bit. So we've heard a little bit from the consultancy perspective and from Callum and Preshi's experiences working within the sector. I now want to turn it over to Tom, who's going to give us a little bit of insight into Toyota material handling and give us a few examples of how he has been able to use sustainability data in different scenarios and really make strategic decisions. So Tom, over to you.
Thank you very much, Eleni. Just a few words about Toyota Material Handling first. Everybody knows Toyota as the world's largest car company. We are also the world's largest material handling equipment manufacturer. This slides give an overview of where we sit within the Toyota organization. We're a daughter company of Toyota Industries Corporation in Japan, of which Toyota Material Handling Group is the largest business unit, and Toyota Material Handling Europe is 1/4 of the Toyota Material Handling Group in terms of people and in terms of revenues. So we have 5 factories across Europe. 80% of what we sell in Europe is made in Europe, and we have sales companies across Europe. Just for size of impact, we have 4 million service visits to customers every year. So that gives an idea of the network that we have and the extension we have. So that's about us. Just wanted to briefly go to play back to what's been said before. I think this pyramid is very interesting because it gives indeed a very good overview of the journey companies go through. From my own experience, from having done this, the implementation of a sustainability reporting process from scratch twice in a company, you know, the moment that you implement a process and a system, the top management will expect you to be immediately at the top of driving value and driving change through the organization, because that's the added value of implementing such a system. The reality is that you have to start at the bottom, because you have to bring the entire organization up through and bring them to maturity through collecting and display, having quality data, understanding, learning, structuring, exploring, sharing. All these needs to are skills and aptitudes that you need to cultivate with the system. So before we had the people and processes as opposed to each other, but whether you have automated system or manual reporting, you still need people across the organization to actually learn how to use data to drive decision making, and that's a learning curve that takes in my experience a couple of years before you get from starting to actually being able to drive value and change with your sustainability data, before your whole organization is also ready to do that. It's a skill the organization needs to learn. Our sustainability strategy is Together We Make a Difference, because ultimately it's sustainability can only be achieved in partnership with the outside world, with suppliers, customers, and public society. We have 3 priorities within our sustainability strategy: to maximize quality and customer safety, to optimize opportunities for people to thrive. So the first is customer focused, the second is employee focused, and minimize environmental impact is planet focused. These are and in each of these areas I would like to give one example of how we've used sustainability data to improve our performance. Our first priority is to maximize quality and customer safety. So we're a customer first organization. We're trying to make sure that our customers have high quality products and services, but we also include in that the quality of our governance and how we're organized as an organization, how we govern ourselves. And some of you may be familiar with the EcoVadis mechanism. It's one of the largest platforms in the world that does third-party evaluation of suppliers' sustainability performance. I think they have 50,000 suppliers on their database. They have more than 100 corporate customers that use it to evaluate their suppliers, very much in the same way as you would have a financial rating agency looking at the creditworthiness of a supplier. EcoVadis looks at whether a company has solid governance, ESG governance, environment, social, and governance aspects covered. Since we've started using the solution, we're happy to see now that we have 50% of our entities scoring gold, which means that they are each of them in the top 10% in sustainability in their own right, and that's very useful to communicate to our customers. It's useful to communicate to our employees that increasingly challenge us as an organization to know that they're working for a responsible organization. But how does this play with data? Well, the only way we got to this excellent level is because The Thinkstep solution that we use since 2015 is actually allowing us to collect KPIs in terms of energy or carbon footprint, absenteeism, accidents, appraisals, and other environmental and social governance topics from each of these organizations. Each of these organizations then has those data available to also submit those to as part of their EcoVadis submission. And one of the things the rating agency will look like is how much information, how much data have you available, and how do you act on the basis of that data. So this is one of the ways we actually increase the value of sustainability data input for our local entities, because not only do they report it into the system that is useful for corporate head office, they are getting an extra local use out of their data. Our second audience stakeholder are of course our employees. We want to optimize opportunities for our people to thrive. And here is one example of how we created value out of our data. In 2013, we started with the collection of absenteeism and injury data from 25 entities across Europe. 2014, we identified that Spain stood out with a 65% reduction in injury rates in 5 years. So we saw that there was a long-term reduction, and that was not just a fluke of 1 year. So we went to Spain, we went to the source, and we could find that there was actually a whole case study behind. And so we documented their journey in a case study, and we published that on our website. And that was then picked up by EU OSHA, the European Agency for Health and Safety at Work, who were looking for case studies promoting health and safety within workspaces. And we were commended by EU Commissioner Thyssen at one of their report awards. We then have because the attraction of success, the attention of the entire organization was drawn into the Spanish case study and how they managed to invest in health and safety and create a win-win-win with a solid business case. Ultimately, it was only a 10,000 euro investment that resulted in 40,000 annual savings. And it's a win for employees, it's a win for the company, and it's a win for also the public society. In 2019, we managed to get other countries, 14 other countries, that are either have implemented or are implementing that Spanish approach. And therefore, we multiply that approach. And this is a bit more detailed. Here you just see that what actually happened, the root cause analysis that they did for their accidents was that back issues were the big problems for all those service technicians. I told you we have millions of visits. These are the people that make the visits to customers to maintain the trucks. And basically, people were taught to do stretching before they start working on a truck. This is what you see here in the picture, and that resulted in considerable decreases in both injury rates and lost day rates. And also from a financial perspective, it was a sound investment with a payback here of a quarter of a year. That results in building trust and celebrating success. We see that we got an award, as I said, from the Commissioner for Social Affairs. But most importantly is that Spain is there as well. The people from Spain that drove this success. It's an opportunity for us to celebrate success. We need to remember that it's not the, we are collecting data. Ultimately, change is driven by people that need to be working hard and passionately, and just entering the data into a system is only one infinitesimally small aspect for them to locally drive change. And this is also, it is very important to have opportunities where we can celebrate the success of local leaders that actually go above and beyond doing things. We use that case study, we use that success by sharing it with our annual meeting of sustainability champions, where we focus on sharing those successes, and where we drive others to copy them, because ultimately that's the use of data, or the use of actually identifying good practices, is actually that how much they are being copied is a measure of their success, I would say. Next. Third way we use data, sustainability data, is to drive the Toyota environmental strategy. Toyota Industries Corporation has a goal to be a zero carbon company, both in operational and solutions, by 2050. That means that by 2030 we need to cut our emissions by 50%, by 2020 by 20%. And we started measuring and reporting all the way back in 1994. On the right, you see what in our 2018 we were able to report as the status versus our targets. We have 142 initiatives, 146 initiatives across Europe for energy saving and CO2 saving. That saved the business 2.2 million euros every year in energy spend. We're at the moment at 74% green electricity, which saves us 5,000 tons of CO2 emissions every year, and we're aiming for 100% by 2020. And last but not least, we were able to reduce our carbon intensity by 30% as a business relative to revenues, and our overall absolute emissions in factories was reduced by 12%. So that's the three ways in how we've used data, not just for the sake of publishing a nice sustainability report, but also trying to drive change and within the organization.
Thank you, Tom, for those examples. And if anybody has any questions or would like to get into a little bit more specifics, please submit a question using the GoToWebinar navigation on the right. There's a little section called questions where you can submit comments. Before we open it up, opening up the floor, just a little quick summary of what we've heard today. So we've looked a lot at this pyramid and thought through how companies can go from the bottom and rise up to the top. And really looking at those bottom levels of data collection and understanding the data that companies need. We've talked a lot about spending some time to evaluate the data that companies are collecting, really understanding its purpose, who it needs to go to in terms of stakeholders, and regularly looking at the materiality of that data. So why is it important, and making adjustments to make sense for that. And also an acknowledgement that effective change can take time, and really shifting up from the understand phase into the harness phase can take a couple of years. But once you start moving into that harness phase, it's really important to extrapolate existing data, to spend time and give yourself the space to be able to forecast those trends. And something that we heard from Tom particularly was the importance of grounding that sustainability data in financial data. Because ultimately being able to pair some sustainability data with financial data can help strengthen the business case for better decision making and really break the silo that exists around sustainability teams and getting data out of just the sustainability team across the business to key decision makers. And that really is the last sort of area that all three speakers focused on, around that communication and engagement of the data across the business. So making it accessible, thinking creatively. As Callum said, this is honestly my favorite example. Project your data on a coffee machine. Why not? Everybody knows the best conversations happen around the coffee machine in a business. So really thinking about the tools and making that data accessible, using automation where possible, and facilitating that information access to stakeholders through automated reporting, and getting the information in front of the right people. And finally, sharing best practices. As Tom mentioned with his example, with Spain, it's great when it happens once, but if you have a best practice, get it out there, copy it. That's the beauty of the data, of being able to share the best findings and inspire other entities, other departments, other colleagues in the business to really capitalize on the insights that you found and drive action and change within the business. So with that point, we have a little poll that we would love to get your feedback on what you resonated the most with you in terms of the data. And I say this and I'm struggling to open the poll. While we wait for this technical difficulty to be sorted out, we do have a couple of questions from the attendees. So first of all, thank you all for listening. Yes, this webinar is being recorded and the link will be shared in the next few days. One question is, what are the main difficulties that you faced in driving change and the arguments that you made to make sustainability data valuable to decision making besides cost reductions? Callum, Preshi, Tom, I'm opening the floor. Feel free to jump in.
Yeah, so I think it's twofold from my perspective. You need to free up the time at the beginning of your data collection to allow time to kind of shift that focus. But it is also a mindset change that we haven't really spoken about much on this call, but there is a switch in mindset that needs to happen with the data collection process. So people are creatures of habit. So if they're collecting data that they've always collected and you're asking them to collect it in a different way to aid your business decision making, you can get some resistance because it's something that they're not used to doing. So it is an area I think you need to be conscious about, that there is a business change process sometimes when coming into doing that switch from just collecting to actually utilizing your data, but it's not something to be afraid of. You will get some resistance, but I feel like the benefit is worthwhile. I don't know if Callum, Tom, you want to jump in?
I think, in order to get quality reporting, one of the key things is to take care of your reporting community. People need to feel that there's value for them in actually in taking part of the whole change management trajectory. And I think we spend a lot of time in not only analyzing the data for the report, but actually preparing benchmark reports. For example, ranking all the entities from the biggest to the smallest emitter, or from the most energy efficient to the least energy efficient. The people with the highest accident rates, the lowest accident rates, and we use those data carefully within the community, not towards management necessarily, but within the community, so that people can say, this is where I'm ranked, or I'm good in this aspect, or I've improved a lot here. This is where these are areas where I can improve. A lot of the time, data is only meaningful if you can contextualize it. If you can say, okay, what is this? Is this a good number, or is this a bad number? And trying to help your community make that data meaningful for them, then they will also be more mindful of the quality they put into your systems.
Thank you both for your answers. Callum, I have one for you, perhaps. How are difficulties between data structure and differences on software requirements usually met? How do you navigate that?
Yeah, well, I saw into the future there and thought that one was coming my way, so thank you. No, we do help various clients get ready for an implementation, but also select the right software. So I think that the main point that I'll say to answer that question is that the kind of data structure, the way that I'm interpreting the question anyway, usually comes a bit further down the line. So software if I can speak properly, requirements are generally at the beginning more broad. So in terms of looking at the requirement specification for software that you want, again, you start off by speaking to the various stakeholders, but there's no shame in kind of not knowing exactly what you want from the software. You know, give the software vendors as much information as you possibly can at this stage, but kind of ask questions in the requirement spec as well, and kind of give them the overall feeling of what you need and what you want, so that going forward you can kind of collaborate with the software vendors, whoever they may be, on how their software can best meet your requirements. It's at that stage, you know, slightly later on in the process, again from my point of view, is where you start to get into the detail. So where you start to say, okay, you know, we understand that software X can help us in our reporting requirements. What are our reporting requirements? And then how do we structure these by going through a mapping exercise, but also kind of working very closely with the software vendor, because they have experience as well. Of course, they've seen it plenty of times on how their software can best meet your requirements around data. So I would say, yeah, the data structure and the kind of the workflows can come later. And just kind of work with the software vendors as much as possible. Obviously, that mapping exercise, which I keep touching on, is key, and it doesn't have to be that complicated. You know, just lay everything out on the table, and then start to draw parallels between certain areas to make it more efficient, and then you can start to kind of formalize where you're going to go and how you're going to collect that data. Hopefully, I answered your question.
I think you did. We do have a follow-up question to that, but first I want to throw one to Tom. So this is for you, and it's: what has been the most effective action and internal engagement strategy to break the silo around the sustainability team in Toyota?
Could you rephrase that question, please?
Yes. I guess what campaigns or how have the sustainability team within Toyota managed to break the silo and really embed sustainability across the company?
I think one of the biggest help for us has been actually we've been moved from strategy to human resources. And so we report directly into the VP for Human Resources. Now we are part of the same team as a team who's focused on leadership development across the organization, and we've really aligned sustainability with our position in sustainability together with leadership, and saying this is what a leader does. This is what a leader within our organization is expected to do, and that's been the greatest help to break across the functions, because it's not something sustainable. Just like leadership, people understand that leadership is not something that is HR's job, but everybody in the organization. So we can now make that parallel and saying, well, sustainability is not a sustainability department's job, but everybody in the organization.
Yeah, I just wanted to jump in because I've seen something that a few companies have done, which has really helped kind of break down just sustainability being in a silo and increasing the kind of widespread knowledge of it, and inviting engagement from people that maybe haven't touched on sustainability. But a lot of companies do health and safety moments at the beginning of the meeting, and a few companies that I've seen now have incorporated sustainability moments in there, where they're potentially sharing this quarter's sustainability results, or a piece around something that they're focused on sustainability, and that has increased in those organizations, at least, those kind of engagement with sustainability. So it's not just this elusive team that are sitting over there. The people are becoming more engaged because they're seeing it more. So I just wanted to put that idea out there because I've seen it work quite well in organizations. And
just one quick comment more than kind of an example. Hopefully this process will become easier. 2019, especially sustainability, is very much on the agenda. It's very much being talked about kind of in the media, in people's private lives, as well as their professional lives. So I'd like to think, and I'm seeing more and more this acceleration with people asking to be involved, include me in this. I want to know what we're doing. So let's cross our fingers and hope that continues.
Definitely. One last question before we wrap up, and if we haven't gotten to your question, we will respond to you via email. So thank you to everyone who submitted questions. But there's one question here around good strategies for presenting projections from data to decision makers and effectively communicating that their projections are not accurate predictions of the future. I don't know if any of you have worked on such examples and can share any insights on how to best effectively communicate that prediction without necessarily sharing that it's a guaranteed prediction that it's going to happen in the next year or so.
I think you can make it very clear in the kind of information you're putting out there. I think a lot of the key decision makers that they're out there are very used to, particularly when it's like the financial information, that things are a projection. It's not guaranteed that it's going that way, but it's a projection based off of the current information that you have. So I think if that's communicated, I don't think you'll get into a situation where they would think that that's the 100% what's going to happen in the future. But by using some of these tools that we've spoken about on the call to share that information to those people, you can make it very clear in the information you're providing. Callum, Tom, Tom, actually, have you had to do this in your experience?
Excuse me again, but I didn't hear exactly the question. It was quick.
No worries. Yeah, I was just asking if you've had this situation of being able to present a forward-looking projection and making it very clear that it is a projection based on the current information you've got, and it's not a guarantee.
Yes, for example, in the area of energy, like for this year, for the first time, we were actually able to go to finance as part of the forecasting and the budgeting process. We were able to say, well, actually, we think that you need to allow for 2 million more extra in your energy budgets because we see a large increase in the first half year in terms of reported energy spend because the prices are going up. And so if you compared to last year, just based on the same consumption, the cost is going to be significantly higher. So we are able, as a function, to not just look backwards and report. Going forward, we're also able to contribute to forecasting. I mean, this is short-term forecasting. Other example, again, with regards to energy policy, is then looking at our current energy spend, our current growth trajectory, and saying, okay, this is how, if you have this growth, strategic growth portfolio, then this is how much we're going to spend on energy. Plus, if you take into account carbon taxes, it could be this much. So we're starting then to open the conversation around shadow cost of carbon, in the internal price of carbon, and making sure that when we plan for investments, that we don't, that people don't use the current price of, only the current price of energy, but that they also take into account future extra costs around energy that are related to potential carbon taxes in the future.
And that's a really powerful use case of being able to really mine the value of data and really using it for future decisions. Just conscious of time, we are out of time, so we will respond to the rest of these questions via email. Thank you all so much for attending and listening to our webinar, and a big thank you to our speakers for sharing their experiences and insights on really harnessing the power of data. Hopefully everyone has some good takeaways, and we will be circulating a recording of this webinar over the next few days. So thank you very much and have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.